There was a time when the kingdom of Aurelian was known by another name. People called it the Moon's Garden. Before betrayal poisoned bloodlines, before ambition swallowed loyalty whole, before the night fire consumed everything a family had built across generations, Aurelian was governed by House Vale, and the royal wolves were beloved, not for their power, not for their armies or their wealth or the fear they could inspire. The kings and queens of House Vale walked among their people as though the kingdom belonged to everyone, as though a crown was not a weapon to be wielded, but a responsibility to be honored. Perhaps that was why the kingdom loved them in return. And perhaps, precisely because of that love, someone decided they had to die. Rain fell without mercy on the night Aurelian burned. Lightning split the sky above the capital. Thunder rolled down from the distant mountains like a warning too late to heed. Inside the royal palace, servants moved quickly through candlelit corridors. Guards doubled patrols along the walls. The air carried an unease that no one could explain and no one could shake. A sense that the world was tilting towards something irreversible. Queen Celeste Vale felt it most of all. She stood beside a nursery window, gazing down at the rain-soaked city below. Her daughter lay sleeping peacefully in a carved cradle. Only 6 months old, her tiny chest rising and falling with the soft rhythm of complete innocence. The queen watched her for a long moment, then reached out and gently brushed a pale strand of hair from the baby's forehead. A strange ache had taken root inside her chest, quiet and unrelenting, refusing to name itself. Then footsteps approached. King Rowan Vale entered the nursery. Water gleamed on his cloak. The expression on his face deepened every fear she already carried. Something had happened, something terrible. The eastern gates have been breached. The words landed like stone dropped into still water. Celeste stared at her husband. The palace gates had never been breached. Not once, not in living memory, not in any generation she could recall from the history she had studied as a girl. By whom? The king's jaw tightened. People we trusted. Neither of them panicked. Royal wolves understood responsibility, and responsibility sometimes demanded impossible choices. Rowan crossed the room slowly, his gaze moving from his wife to the sleeping child. His expression carried the weight of a man already accepting something unbearable. "There's still time," he said. "Not for us." Celeste spoke the words softly. Neither pretended otherwise. The attack had been planned with precision. The betrayal ran too deep. The palace would fall before dawn, and they both knew it. A soft knock at the door. An elderly wolf entered. Commander Benedict Ashcam, captain of the Royal Guard, protector of 3 generations of House Vale. The old warrior looked exhausted. Blood stained his sleeve. His face carried the terrible certainty of a man who had already calculated the outcome of the battle being fought in the corridors below. "The western passage remains open," he said. The queen closed her eyes. The moment had arrived. The one no parent should ever face. The choice no mother should ever be forced to make, between holding her child and saving her. Rowan lifted the infant from the cradle. The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling around his thumb, completely unaware that an entire kingdom was collapsing around her. The king almost broke in that instant. Almost. Instead, he pressed a kiss to her forehead, slow, deliberate, as though memorizing the feeling. Then placed her gently into Benedict's arms. The old warrior froze. "No." His voice cracked. "Your Majesty, you swore an oath. You swore House Vale would survive." Benedict's eyes filled instantly. The king's own remained bright with tears he refused to shed. Outside, distant screams echoed through the palace. The inner grounds had been reached. Time had run out. The queen stepped forward. She removed the silver pendant from around her neck, a crescent moon wrapped in flowering vines, worn by queens of House Vale for generations. It had been a symbol of their dynasty. Tonight, it became something else entirely. A promise, a farewell, a thread connecting a mother to a daughter across whatever darkness lay ahead. She fastened it carefully around her daughter's neck. The baby smiled. A simple, open smile, the kind only very young children possess, unclouded by any understanding of what is being lost. The queen nearly shattered, but she stepped back because she understood with absolute clarity that if she held her daughter again, she would never let go. And if she never let go, the child would die. Benedict understood. His hands trembled as he adjusted the blanket. Then, slowly, painfully, he bowed. Not to the king or queen, but to the child, to the future, to the last living heir of a dynasty that was about to be erased from history. "I will find her a life worth living," he said. Rowan nodded. "That is all we ask." The commander turned toward the door. Each step seemed heavier than the one before. At the threshold, he paused, just once, and looked back. The king beside the queen holding his hand. Two wolves who had chosen sacrifice over survival, love over self-preservation. The image would follow Benedict Ashcombe for the rest of his life. Then he walked out and carried the future into the storm. The palace fell before dawn. Fire consumed the western towers. The royal banners burned. By sunrise, House Vale was declared extinct. The traitors celebrated. The kingdom mourned. And history recorded the end of a bloodline. But history was wrong. Because far beyond the burning capital, beneath sheets of rain and rolling thunder, an old wolf rode through the darkness, carrying a sleeping child. A child no one would ever stop hunting. A child who would grow believing she was ordinary. A child who would one day be rejected, exiled, forgotten, and then discover that an entire kingdom had been stolen from her before she was old enough to speak her own name. Her name was Seraphine Vale, and the story of everything she had lost had only just begun. The morning Seraphine turned 18, she woke before sunrise, not from excitement, but from fear. The fear had lived beneath her skin for weeks now, quiet, persistent, impossible to reason away. Everyone in the village said the mate ceremony was the happiest day of a wolf's life, the day destiny revealed itself, the day lonely futures became shared ones. But happiness had always seemed to find other people first. She sat in the small attic room of her aunt and uncle's farmhouse, listening to wind scrape across the roof. The room was cold and sparsely furnished. A bed, a trunk, a cracked mirror, a patched blanket. She had lived here for 18 years. She had never truly belonged. Pale gray light slipped through the window. She opened the trunk and touched the dress folded carefully inside. Pale blue, sewn entirely by hand over the course of 6 months. Every coin saved, every stitch completed by lantern light after the household had gone to sleep. A small smile came to her face, then faded. What if he doesn't choose me? The question cut far deeper than it should have. She stared at herself in the cracked mirror. Long chestnut hair, gray-blue eyes, a face people called pleasant, but never chose first. She forced herself to breathe. Maybe today would be different. Maybe today someone would finally see her clearly. The hope felt fragile enough to break with a touch. By midday, the village square overflowed with celebration. Banners fluttered overhead. Lanterns swayed in the breeze. Seraphine stood near the edge of it all, alone. Not because she had been pushed there, but because no one had thought to make room for her. No one saved her a place. She had always existed at the periphery of other people's happiness. Then her name cut through the crowd. Mira pushed toward her, dark curls bouncing, energy radiating from every step. "You're hiding again," she said. "I'm standing near the edge," which is hiding. Despite herself, Seraphine laughed. Mira studied her face and softened. "You're nervous. Isn't everyone?" "Not like this." Then Mira stepped closer and looked her in the eye. "Listen to me. If he's your mate, he'll be lucky." And she meant every word. The ceremony began at sunset. Gold and violet light painted the mountains as wolves gathered around the moon altar. Excitement slowly gave way to anticipation. The moment had finally arrived. Among the young wolves stood Tristan Hale, future alpha, strong, confident, admired by everyone who knew him. The boy Seraphine had secretly loved for nearly 3 years, never telling a soul, because loving someone who barely noticed her felt too humiliating to speak aloud. Yet the possibility, the quiet, fragile possibility, that the moon goddess might name him her mate had carried her through countless lonely nights. Names were called, matches formed. Laughter and tears mingled as fates were decided. Then the elder's voice lifted clearly across the square. Seraphine Ash. Her heart hammered. She stepped forward. Every eye found her at once. without judgment, without shame, just watching. Then another name followed, Tristan Hale. The murmur that swept the crowd was immediate. Tristan stepped forward. Their eyes met. The bond stirred between them. The moon goddess had spoken. And for one breathtaking, devastating second, Seraphine believed everything was about to change. Then Tristan's expression shifted. The walk home felt endless. Behind her, music still drifted from the village square. Laughter carried on the night air. Life continued as though nothing had happened, as though her heart hadn't been broken before hundreds of witnesses. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. The mate bond was gone, but what ached most wasn't losing Tristan. It was losing hope. The hope that someone would choose her, that she belonged somewhere, that all the lonely years had been leading towards something worth reaching for. Martha Ashe was already waiting when she arrived home. "You embarrassed us." The words struck harder than they should have, not because they surprised her, because some part of her had still hope for kindness. "I'm sorry." The apology came automatically. Years of habit, years of making herself smaller. Martha's expression hardened further. Then she said it quietly, as though announcing something already decided. The elders had been talking. People were calling Seraphine bad luck, and the pack needed stability. 3 sharp knocks at the door followed shortly after. The elders entered, the oldest wolves in Ashmore. None looked pleased. The eldest turned toward her with eyes that carried regret, which somehow felt worse than outright cruelty, because regret implied he already knew he was doing something wrong. "We believe it would be best if you left Ashmore." Seraphine stared at him. The words refused to form a coherent meaning inside her mind. "You are to be exiled." "Please," she whispered. "I haven't done anything. I've lived here my entire life." No one answered, and that silence told her everything. She wasn't guilty. They all knew it. It simply didn't matter. "You have until sunrise." The cruelty of it nearly took her breath. One night, one final night. Then the elders turned and walked out, and the door closed behind them, and the silence that flooded the farmhouse was the worst sound she had ever heard. The tears came, years of loneliness, years of trying, years of quiet hoping. All of it collapsed at once, because no matter how hard she worked, no matter how kind she tried to be, no matter how carefully she had lived, it had never been enough. Outside, the moon hung cold and distant above Ashmore, watching as a girl who had already lost one family prepared to lose another. Chapter 3, The Road of Snow and Silence. Seraphine did not sleep. By the pale gray light of early morning, she sat in the attic staring at the open trunk that held everything she owned. 3 dresses, a blanket, a comb, a sewing kit, a faded book of poems. 18 years reduced to what could fit inside a single box. A soft knock came at her door. 3 tentative taps. She opened it, and her heart broke all over again. Evie stood there, bundled in an oversized coat, dark curls escaping beneath a knitted cap. Snow dusted her small shoulders. Tears already filled her amber eyes. The little girl threw herself into Seraphine's arms and held on as though letting go would make everything real. "They can't make you leave," Evie said fiercely. "They can, Evie." "No!" The certainty in the child's voice was devastating in its simplicity. She had come in the dark, in the cold, in secret, because she could not bear to do nothing. Then Evie reached into her pocket and held out a small wooden wolf carved with both hands, clearly handmade, one ear sitting crooked, the tail slightly too large. She offered it with the complete seriousness of someone giving the most important gift they possessed. "I made it," she said, "so you won't be alone." Seraphine accepted the carving with trembling fingers. Then, without being asked, Evie climbed onto the small stool beside the bed. Understanding came immediately. Every Sunday after service, Seraphine braided Evie's hair. They had done it for years. Neither remembered when the tradition had started, only that it had become theirs. Evie sat very still. Seraphine stood behind her. Her fingers moved through dark curls. Twist, fold, weave. The familiar rhythm steadying them both. Neither mentioned that this might be the last time. Some griefs are too large to name aloud. "Will you come back?" Evie asked. "I'll try," Seraphine said, a small, merciful lie. When the child finally left, She paused in the doorway. "I'll miss you." The words lingered long after she disappeared downstairs. Dawn arrived too quickly. Seraphine carried her trunk down and set it by the door. Martha sat at the kitchen table and never looked up, never offered help, never said goodbye. That silence hurt less than it once would have, because during the long, sleepless night, Seraphine had finally understood something. People who want you gone are not family. She opened the door herself. Cold air rushed inside, sharp, biting, alive. She stepped out. The door closed behind her with the soft sound of a latch catching, and 18 years ended. The village was already awake. Windows cracked open. Curtains shifted. Whispers followed her through the snow. The same wolves who had smiled at her yesterday now looked away. Seraphine kept walking. The trunk grew heavier with every step. Ahead, the border stones marked the end of Ashmore and the beginning of wilderness. At the boundary, she slipped her hand into her pocket and wrapped her fingers around Evie's carved wolf. One person would remember. One person cared. Perhaps that wasn't much, but it wasn't nothing. She crossed the border stones without looking back. And with a single step, Seraphine Ash ceased to belong anywhere. Chapter 4. The Winter That Wanted Her Dead. By midday, she could no longer feel her toes. The road had vanished beneath endless white. Her trunk had become impossible to carry, forcing her to drag it through the drifts. The wind sharpened. Snow lashed her face. Hours passed. The sky darkened. Life narrowed to a single goal. One more step, then another, then another. When her boot finally split open, she sat in the snow with trembling fingers and wrapped strips of cloth around the broken sole. The repair was pathetic. It would have to be enough. When she opened the trunk to eat, she found a cloth bundle she hadn't packed herself. Bread, cheese, dried apples. Someone had left it for her. Not Martha. She knew that instantly. Thomas, perhaps, in some remembered way. Or Evie. She ate slowly and kept moving. By late afternoon, the forest swallowed her. At first, the trees felt comforting. Then came the sounds. A branch snapping too deliberately. Movement beyond the pines. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. She found the tracks an hour later. Wolf prints, several of them, very fresh, pressed deep into the snow. As daylight faded, panic threatened. She forced it down. Thomas Ashe had taught her enough to know that fear solved nothing. She scanned the landscape. Then she saw it. Smoke. Thin and gray against the storm-dark sky. The relief nearly buckled her knees. Someone lived nearby. She changed direction immediately, following the smoke through thickening trees. Her pace quickened. The cold no longer mattered. The hunger no longer mattered. Only the shelter. Only the warmth. Then a howl shattered the silence, far too close. A second howl answered. Then a third. The forest came alive. Seraphine ran. And somewhere beyond the storm, a massive gray wolf lifted his head. Golden eyes narrowed. The wind had carried him a scent he had never encountered before. He turned toward the storm, toward the girl running through the snow, and for the first time in years, the alpha felt something he couldn't quite name. Chapters 5 through 8. Thornheart Ridge. The cabin emerged through the blizzard like a promise she hadn't dared to make to herself. Warm golden light glowed behind frost-covered windows. And there, standing beneath a lean-to, splitting firewood in the middle of a storm, as though weather were something to be ignored, was a man. He turned and saw her. Neither moved. Then another howl cut the air, much closer than before. "Move," he said. The single word wasn't loud. It was absolute. She obeyed. He crossed the snow toward her without hesitation, lifted her trunk with effortless ease, and nodded toward the door. Inside, warmth struck her the moment they crossed the threshold. Wood smoke, fresh bread, stew simmering on the fire. The word home arrived in her mind before she could stop it. Then a small voice came from down the hallway. A little girl appeared. 7 years old, dark braids over one shoulder, bright blue eyes, a blanket draped around her like a cape. She stopped and stared, and then pointed with complete seriousness. You brought home a person. The man pinched the bridge of his nose. Leanna, what? You were supposed to be asleep. I was. Then I woke up. Leanna looked back at Seraphine. You look frozen. I was working on it, Seraphine said, the answer escaping before she could stop it. Leanna laughed, a bright, unguarded sound. The first laughter Seraphine had heard since leaving Ashmore. The man, Aldrich, pressed his lips together in the particular expression of someone fighting a losing battle against amusement. Sit near the fire, he said. He brought her stew. Their fingers brushed as she took the bowl, and something passed between them. Quick, uncertain, gone before either could examine it. Yet he stilled too, just briefly, as though he had felt it as well. In the days that followed, an extraordinary thing happened. Nothing and everything. Snow buried the mountain passes. Travel remained impossible. Seraphine helped with meals and mending and reading Leanna stories by firelight. The child claimed her immediately and completely, with the absolute confidence of someone who has decided a thing and sees no need to explain it. And Aldrich, the man who rarely smiled, who watched the tree line with the wariness of someone who had already lost too much, began to change, almost imperceptibly, like ice at the very beginning of a thaw. One evening,